Welcome to the Simply Real Life podcast. I'm Sarah, the founder of Simply Real Health, here to help you simplify, amplify, and elevate your life. This show is for those of you who want the real talk on how to live a more intuitive and intentional life, a life that's healthy from the inside out, and one that feels more effortless, aligned, simple, and more alive. We cover it all, from health, wellness, mindset, motherhood, daily habits and rituals, to business and relationships, creativity and growth, and tiny tricks to feeling your best, and the energetics behind it all filled with personal stories, unfiltered conversations, and of course, answering all of your burning questions, all in the way of simplicity and keeping it real, so that you can create your own version of your healthiest life. Let's do it. Katie, welcome to the Simply Real Life podcast. I am so excited about today's conversation with one of my dear friends. She is a magical woman. She is a business owner. She's a wife. She's a mama. And she is personally just one of my dear friends, both in our personal real lives and also in business, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to have her on. Is because one of the questions that comes in pretty often is on the topic of creating more meaningful and deeper friendships. And I feel like there's nobody better to talk about this than Katie, as she is a living, breathing example of this in my mind. And I think one of the best examples I can think of in my life of what it means to have female friendships that are supportive and growth oriented, and you're constantly cheering each other on. There's no sense of competition. And so, Katie, welcome to the show.
Friend, I am so happy to just be with you and discuss beautiful things and just some magic. I love you so much. And this is going to be such a good conversation.
Yes. So Katie and I have been friends for years. I think we've discussed maybe it's been a decade, if not a little bit longer. So we've seen each other through a lot of different seasons of our lives. Feel like rapidly packed into 10 years that there's been so much that has happened, in good ways and hard ways and all the ways in between. And I think even describing just how we met in general is such a great example of exactly what I want to be talking about today. So just to take y'all back, this was, a long time ago, about a decade ago. Katie, do you remember this? You sent this email, and it was about something for work. It was about doing some kind of collaboration, or it was a blog tour, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So I think it was 9-10 years ago. And I can't remember how I had found you on the internet. I really have no idea how I got, because I was in Colorado and you were in Seattle, but somehow I found you, and I was doing a blog tour with, I think at the time it was 25 women. And I found you. I was like, I want her. I wanted your wisdom, your energy, all of it together. And I had sent an email to you, and I was just like, hey, would you be willing to be a part of this blog tour? Here's kind of the topic and themes, and you can write whatever you want and the wisdom you want to bring to this. And there's 24 other women. They're all going to be linking to each other and sharing their own take on this. I was like, would you be willing to be a part of it? And so fast, you're back. Yes, I'm in. And I was like, hey.
Totally. And looking back now, I'm like, wow, that was really brave of you to do that, to put yourself out there in that way, to reach out to people that you didn't know at all in person, had no contact with. But that act of searching or looking for people that are maybe more like-minded, what was that process? What gave you that confidence in order to do that? Because I think that's sometimes the starting piece, right? Feeling brave enough to do that or reach out and be a little bit outside of your comfort zone.
I feel like the energy for me, granted this was a while ago, so I'm I think what it was, but for me and what I still carry now is when I come from a place of excitement and collaboration and wanting to hype up these other beautiful women that I'm watching versus compare myself or compete with them. it changes how I experience it and how I can reach out to them, because it's no longer, am I going to be enough? Am I going to be okay? It's shifted to, I think you're so awesome. Can I highlight you? Can I support you? And when I've shifted it to that, it takes away anything of being scary or hiding or anything. Like it's no longer about that piece.
I want to pause on this for a second because I feel like, so that energy that you're talking about of, okay, like that's how you're thinking as you're sending these things out or getting the confidence or the bravery to do something like that. That's the energy that I got. When I saw that email, it was like the immediate yes, because I'm like, I could tell that your energy and your intention were so happy and positive. It's like, I could say yes, I could say no. And your answer probably would have been like, okay, great. No, no problem. And I think sometimes, I don't know if you think this is true, but just the energy that people give off. Like it's such a vibe. You can read somebody's vibe so quickly, or if they're trying to come to you to get something first, I'm like, whoa. But it just doesn't feel good. Like you would never do that if you're dating. You would never just like go right in, for the ass. But like, why is that not thought about more like friendships? Because it's either a deterrent or you're like, oh, yeah, like this person seems like the type of energy that I want to be around a little bit more.
One thing as you're talking that I picked up on that was also a piece for me is whether you said yes or no, I was okay with it. I wasn't attached to the outcome, and it wasn't going to mean something about me if you say no. And so I think coming from that place in friendship, whether it's approaching new people or even friendships that you've been close for a decade, allowing yourself to come to it with the energy of like, this is something amazing and beautiful, and asking, do you want to be a part of it? And even if you say no or something else is going on, they like, that's awesome. You're still awesome. And they're done with it versus creating these stories in our head. And I think that was also a big piece of like, I like you. I'd love for you to be in my sphere. I think what you're doing is amazing. And I totally respect if this isn't a good fit or time or however it is for you.
Okay, but how do you think you got there? Like to that place? Like, how did you get to the place of cultivating that energy where it's like, great. If not great, it doesn't have this deep impact on my self-confidence or, either way. Like, how did you get to that point?
I'm trying to think back to then, but I'm just going to go from now because I still experience this today, right? Whether it's making a new business contact, which sounds so formal, or we moved states 2 years ago and then had a baby. And it's like, I'm still developing those beautiful, amazing, juicy friendships here. And so it's still meeting people. But for me now, I've done enough exploration and getting honest with myself of who am I? What do I want? And knowing and owning those pieces and what I can give allows me to, I think, have peace with who I am. And thus, in asking people, even if it's like, hey, you want to be my friend? Being okay enough with myself, like, I'm good. I'm good with who I am. I'm still growing and there's still things to like shift and change and be better at, but I'm good with who I am. I love who I am. And if you want to connect with me and share in this and make something magical together, that would be awesome. And if not, I'm still really good with myself and still really good with who you are. And I think a lot of it was just getting really clear on like, who am I? What do I desire? What am I showing up as? What is my purpose? Like all those pieces of getting clarity on who we are as a person allows us to then show up in a detached way, but in a really healthy, detached way to make those connections. And I think when two whole people, not someone being like, I need this, as you were saying, or I'm grabbing this or fulfill this for me or do this, when you can just come up and be like, hey, can we both make each other's lives better? Like that creates such a beautiful experience.
I totally agree. And I feel like for a lot of women in this community, like they may hear you say that of like, I'm good with myself. I know myself. I trust myself. Do you remember back then in what way could somebody start doing that? In what way? Is there anything that you can think of, or an example, or a tiny piece that people could start with? Because I do think you're onto something there. So many of the relationships in your life of any form really are this reflection of you, right? Of your own internal state, your own internal trust in yourself, your own knowledge of yourself. Like, it's something that we talk about a lot on this podcast, is like, how do you even get there? Like, what did that look like for you?
I can remember very clearly. This was, I don't know, 15 years ago. And I was having a really hard time figuring out everything from my desires, but also what did I actually believe to be true versus someone else's story or way that they have seen life or lived life or put a version of that onto me. And I was working with a coach at the time. And she's like, okay, well, this plant over here or this flower, do you like this? Yes, no. The answer to this doesn't matter. There's no bearing on it. And it was like me going through a series of questions. And I remember vividly walking through my house at the time, different things where it was building the self-trust within myself to be even starting with, do I like this? Does this resonate? Not, well, I should like this because it goes with this. And my aunt says this, and all this kind of like noise that we get bombarded, especially now today with social media, of like what we should do, be, like, have. It's like, but for me, if I don't have to answer this for anybody else, what's the answer for me? And it started building that kind of self-trust and that muscle. It started expanding to stories around my life and what's possible, to relationships and what's possible, to friendships, to standards within friendships, to devotion, like what is devotion within friendship, and being able to start to answer those questions for myself and form new ones that were really true and aligned for me versus what I had gathered that wasn't necessarily true and aligned growing up.
Mhm. I love that. That's such a easy, tangible place to start. Of just starting to record stuff in your mind of like, what do I actually think about that? And then you should pick up on patterns. And then you're like, oh, interesting. I'm more naturally drawn to this versus that. I think there's so much wisdom there. And it's almost like anywhere you could start would be helpful, whether it's looking through clothes in your closet. Or I think one of the things that you said to me that will always stick so true in my mind is like, does this light me up, or does this make me kind of like concave? Does this make me shrink back or just not be excited? Is starting to follow and listen to those instincts. I think when you have two people like that in a friendship, in any type of relationship, like two people that feel so secure in who they are, you're then able to show up to each other in such a different way. Because as we've talked about before, like, you show up and you're whole, you're good. You're not dependent on that person. It's not a needy energy, but you can be there more to serve or just to hold space. And I think that's one of the things, at least for us and our friendship, that has been so helpful and so unique and different, is that there's none of the element of competition or comparison, because we both know ourselves so well and also own who we are so fully. The great parts and our gifts, and then also the parts that are like, that's funny, like that's like a funny thing that you do.
Yeah, the knowing of ourselves, but also the mutual respect for either of us to be able to show up and call the other person forward, or to mirror back and be like, I know this about you, and this is beautiful, and this is true, and this is powerful, and I need you to see you how I see you right now, even if you've forgotten something,
Mm-hmm.
if you've forgotten the spark of you. Because yeah, I know myself, but there's
Mm-hmm.
blind spots too. And so having the friendship we have of, I trust you enough and we've developed it enough and I respect you enough for when you do say something like that I'm like, oh, that hits it in like the best way possible. And it's like, okay, yep, I love that. I'm gonna rise that. You saw me that way. Okay. Like it brings
Yeah.
me to a whole different level of
Mhm.
who I am and who I could be.
Mm-hmm. I relate. Yeah, I think so too. And sometimes that's hard to have in your marriage or like your committed relationship or partnership. It's like you're in the day to day with them so much it's such a helpful thing to have friendships in your life that they're not in the nitty gritty of day to day, but they can see and catch you in your stories, like not afraid to call you out. Like, I think that's another big element to talk about because it is easy to forget maybe what you are good at or your natural traits or tendencies because we're always constantly working on the things that maybe don't come so easy to us. So to have somebody to speak into your life in that way, I think is so, so helpful. Are there any other things that come to your mind when you think about a deeper, more meaningful friendship? Because so many people are looking for this, but not quite sure where to start or maybe what that even means. So we've like hit on a couple of things. Is there anything else that comes to mind?
I think a really huge piece of being able to create these kind of relationships is the coming from personal responsibility and wholeness. And so we talked about the neediness and touching on that piece, but the ability for someone to fill their own cup and to take the time with themselves to get grounded instead of just drama spewing on someone else and being like, okay, here's my clarity, here's my insights. I let myself feel this. And sometimes I need to feel it with other people, but the energy of it is different. It's not asking someone to take on everything. It's asking for someone to be like, can you witness this here? And then can we have a dialogue where you give me your perspective and I can shift this and move with it? And I still own the responsibility for my life versus me trying to get something from you or me saying, you need to take some responsibility for my life. Like there's a freedom within it. I think without that freedom, it makes it really hard to create that kind of an epic friendship because you can't be responsible for someone else's happiness or responsible for someone else filling that cup. And so when someone comes to a friendship in that and they haven't done that, you feel the pressure. You feel that thing and you can only do it for so long. But when you have two people meeting in it, you just keep up leveling each other and can draw the best out of it when you come at it from a place where some people call it self-sourcing, but have drawn enough within of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's true. All relationships, right? Business, personal, marriage, friendships. It's like you got to own your side of the street. You got to be taking care of yourself physically and mentally and emotionally in order to show up for people. And a lot of times people have that backwards if they think, oh, I'll do that after I help everybody and everything else. But that type of energy is not as helpful as somebody who shows up in the opposite way. Okay. Taking a wild tangent ride. Stick with me for a second. I think one of the things that we have talked about a lot as it pertains to running businesses, also as it pertains to motherhood, I feel like it does have this deep impact on what and how you do things and how you see things. This concept of your feminine energy versus the masculine. And I feel like this was one of the topics that we talked about. I don't know, how many years was that? I think a long time ago. And now it's so much more common to be talked about. But like, what role do you think that plays? And maybe just so like your summary of what is masculine versus feminine energy and what does it look like living and having relationships from a place of the more feminine energy versus how our society runs, which is usually more masculine energy based.
Yeah, we had a lot of conversations around this, especially in business. So how thus far I've conceptualized like masculine. Masculine is very doing and decisive. And it's almost like an emptying of your cup. You're doing, you're decisive, like you're conquering and doing, right? The feminine is like the flow and the creation and the receiving and being filled and almost like and more. And so in the context of business, I think in something I'm still massively learning and navigating, but there's just more layers to it is in business and then friendship. But business is when you run a company or business, you're making a lot of decisions. You're leading a lot of things. You're getting things done. And a lot of times in the masculine way of approaching it is you lose some of that femininity stuff, which is what fueled the business to begin with. For those who naturally lean more feminine in the sense of the creation, the ideas and the marketing and the feel and the branding and the emails and how you connect and communicate with people. And so I think the thing that is so important and what I experienced is actually when we started our mini mastermind, however many years ago, is one, I didn't feel as alone anymore. But two, there was feminine energy in just our dynamic in our conversations and prioritizing not just the doing, but the being able to be together and to be able to receive from each other versus constantly like putting it out there. And I think that shifted my business. It shifted my happiness in my business. It took the pressure off my business. And when I say business, any woman can insert in this. It takes the pressure off of your marriage. It takes the pressure off of motherhood. Like it takes the pressure off of all these different things when you have these other women to do life with and to relax and laugh and create and mirror back this flow. It shifts the entire way you get to walk through life and experience life when you have that community and that reflection and that wisdom and that sensuality and being able to have pleasure and fun. Like that's not really typically what the masculine or men do. So many times you and I, like we've gone on trips together and all this, and the best conversations is we're either like lounging around a pool or we're like in dinner, drinking wine, and we're talking about our sex lives and different things. And it's like, that is the feminine life, the bonding, the community piece that I think is missing for so many women in all aspects of life. And it was such a beautiful growth propellant and just a heart propellant for me when I started bringing that so much more into my life and my friendships and my business.
Gosh, I so agree. And that's how communities used to be. All the women were together and raising the kids together and doing everything together. And so I feel like there is some sort of deep recognition that happens where you're like, oh, I've been missing this. I haven't had this. And I think for so many women, it's just not a priority, right? Because there's so many other things that are urgent or more important, it seems like, in that moment. But even that tiny shift of how can I call in or create or cultivate more feminine energy in my life, I feel like sisterhood and having a community or just even a few people where you do have that kind of deeper, closer relationship with, like, is such a good way to practice tangibly being in your feminine. Like, how good does it feel when you come home from a girls' night where it's not just talking about surface stuff or gossip, but like you actually go deep on some topics and you are laughing and crying and everything in between? Those nights feel like they fuel me for like an entire week sometimes. And sometimes it can be like, oh yeah, I didn't even know that I was missing that or needing that. And I just get a lot of questions from women of like, what does that even mean? Like, how can you practice cultivating more feminine energy in your life? And we dominate in the masculine, like all the time. So I think in this context of relationships, it's just such a great area to think about. When you are in that energy, it creates such a different energy in the room versus you're going there to get something from someone, or you're checking something off the box, or you're so wound tight and stressed out. It just changes the whole dynamic of things.
Absolutely. So I moved two women that are in my life. I call them remarkable. They're truly just remarkable women that I've met here and creating these beautiful friendships. Is the first one, we were out for a brunch. It was my husband. My baby was like 6 weeks old, but being in a feminine energy of play and openness and sensuality and the joy of life, which is very feminine. And they ended up talking with us as they were leaving. She's like, here's my number. And it was like, you don't have this. I have to go out and get. There's a lot more magnetism within it of creating those friendships and those relationships when you are good with yourself. As we were talking about, like part of being able to be in that feminine energy is the ability to trust yourself and know yourself in your desires and to claim your desires. And women can feel that. And women who are at a place that can see that or want that and respect it, and also feel this energy of like playfulness and funness, it becomes a magnet of creating those relationships, whether it's new or the friendships that you have, and letting them evolve and deepen and have that vulnerability while also having the lightness.
It's so true. Do you think there's any ways that you have taught yourself or learned over the years of not only like making those friendships, but keeping them? Do you have any tips, secrets? Because I feel like for me, we're both in this busy life stage, but we somehow manage to still always stay in touch and know what's going on in each other's lives. And I need some ideas, which is why I'm asking.
I don't know if this is as much of a tip. I'll give like a tactical pieces of what I might do. But I think the first piece is intentionally within yourself, shifting your place to be someone who can create that kind of friendship with someone that you respect and admire and want to create it with. Like it starts with you and then like intentionally seeking out those kind of women. Like I intentionally sent you that email like a decade ago of cultivating that. When I have women in my spirit who I adore and I respect and I admire, and I think they are just like badasses in the most feminine way possible.
Mhm. Right.
I want to be around them. I want to know what's going on in their lives. I want to be devoted to them in that friendship. And if I've had other women who haven't maybe met me in the same place, or maybe we just aren't aligned, I'm not as likely to feel the pull and the commitment and the devotion to continuing to want to reach out to them.
Mm.
So I think getting yourself to that place, finding the women that compel you to want to do it. It's
Right.
like in a dating relationship or marriage. If you're trying to muster it up, of the energy of the courage to be like, I need to reach out to them. I don't really want to, but I should. You're like, what are you doing with this dude or this
Right.
person, right? It's kind of the same incentive of how can you create it where you're like, oh, she's just so awesome.
Mhm.
Like, I want to be around her. And for me, because life does get full with marriage, business, baby, this kind of stuff, I intentionally put like reminders in my calendar and things to text people to be like, hey, how's it going? Or just not be like, if someone comes up on my mind, like, I just thought about you today. It's not having to be so formal. You're on my heart. Freaking awesome. I love you. That's all. No need to respond. No
Yes.
need to have any kind of reciprocity in that instance, but like, hey, this is what I've got to give. And I think you're amazing. And I think that dynamic and the respect, all that creates a whole different level of friendship
Yeah.
in busy seasons can sustain itself, but also sustains itself for the long term, like a decade.
Yes. I do love that. I mean, there's so much there. Like the magnetism element is huge. It's like you attract into your life what you are, the energy that you're putting out, how you think about things, how you approach things. Like everybody hears off a vibe. Like whether you believe in that stuff or not, just even comes down to quantum physics. Like everybody is energy. And so what you think and how you feel, like those create the energy that you're giving off. You're right. I love there's just no pressure. That's the best thing to say is like, no pressure to respond. I'm just thinking of you. That's the best kind of text to receive or voice text or whatever. It's like, okay, yeah, great. You're not adding anything to my plate, but it should feel like a breath of fresh air, right? Good friendships always feel like that.
And I wanted to add to it as you're talking, I was like, there's also a level of worthiness. Like, what do you believe you're worthy of within your friendships in those dynamics? And when you can raise the bar of how you see yourself and what you're worthy of in other women surrounding you, how you pursue and approach, it's just the same for dating relationships too, but how you like approach that and perceive it can shift the entire way you want to show up.
Katie, I know we could talk for like a million hours. We oftentimes do, but probably broken up these days. Text back and forth. Where can people find you? What are you working on? Like, what's going on in your world if people are intrigued by this conversation and you and just kind of wanting to learn more about your wisdom? Where can you find you?
The best place for right now is my website, old school, katiedenowden.com. And I have a lot of different offerings of how I get to play and work with people and creating freedom and joy and just meaning in their lives. But a new one I have coming out is all about creating remarkable friendships and relationships and becoming in turn more remarkable yourself. Check it out. You can go to the website and maybe someday I'll get on social media.
I love that about you. I do. Talk about knowing who you are and just owning it. It's it's the best. And truly, like, what better person to teach this topic? I think I know it. I've experienced it. I've seen you. I've known you for so many years, and you know a lot about this topic. I think both personally and from all the women that you've coached over the years. And I just think that it is missing for so many women, especially in our day and age that we're in right now, where everything is online and social media and everybody's so busy and doing a million different things and wearing a million different hats of what does this look like? What can it look like? And then what's the deeper meaning? Like, how is this going to impact your life in a completely different way? So you're magic. Amazing. Thank you for coming on the show with us.
Thank you for having me, babe. I love you.
Love you too. If you enjoyed this episode and want more like it, make sure you're subscribed to the Simply Real Life podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and maybe share it with a friend or two. That would mean the world.